Imagine for a moment that you are an architect.
Okay.
You've spent, I don't know, 3 years and hundreds of millions of dollars designing this magnificent, towering skyscraper.
Right. A masterpiece in your own mind.
Exactly. You have labored over the blueprints in a pristine, climate-controlled studio. The mathematics are flawless. The geometry is perfect.
You've built the ideal structure. On paper.
On paper, yes. But there's a catch. Once the building is actually constructed and the doors are open to the public, you absolutely refuse to ever set foot on the top floor during a windstorm.
You refuse to feel the sway.
You refuse to feel the sway. You avoid the terrifying physical reality of the elements interacting with your creation. And because you refuse to feel that sway, because you only know the building as a mathematical theory rather than, well, a human habitat, you inevitably design a hostile space.
You do. And your residents feel the nausea that you ignored. They feel the panic.
Right.
And eventually, they pack up, they leave, and they never come back. It is the ultimate lethal disconnect.
Between the people who build our world and the people who actually have to live in it.
Exactly.
Today, we are conducting an autopsy of that exact failure. And from that autopsy, we are extracting a blueprint for survival. This deep dive it's not about casual, bubbly startup advice.
No, definitely not.
It is a severe, high-stakes exploration into the architecture of human relationships, specifically how those relationships are systematically scaled or, completely destroyed through technology.
And we're drawing entirely on the operational philosophies of Kevin Hale
Yes.
and his company Wufoo. We're looking at a methodology that turned a simple software tool into a billion-dollar valuation.
And that valuation, it wasn't achieved through aggressive marketing or viral growth hacks.
Not at all. It was achieved through what we can really only describe as a fanatical, obsessive adherence to a single philosophy.
Right. Hale argues that the only reliable path to surviving at scale is maintaining the exact same values that earned you your very first single dollar.
It's a philosophy of operationalized empathy.
Operationalized empathy. But to understand how to build that, we first have to understand the silent, dangerous illusion that infects almost every technology company on Earth.
The illusion of the isolated creator?
Yes, the isolated engineer. Think about the months or even years before a piece of software is actually released to the world.
Millions of dollars, thousands of hours, all poured into building systems in total, absolute isolation.
Hale describes this environment as a state of bliss and nirvana for the engineers.
Because in that vacuum, the creator feels omnipotent. The code behaves exactly as commanded. If they type a command, the system obeys perfectly.
It's predictable.
Completely predictable. In the silence of that development environment, the engineer is effectively a god.
But then comes the launch.
Right. And the launch shatters that illusion instantly.
Because actual human users arrive.
And users do not behave like pristine code. They break the system. They act unpredictably.
They click the wrong buttons. They completely misunderstand the interface.
They get frustrated. And when they get frustrated, they abandon the platform.
And that abandonment is really the stake of our entire conversation today.
Yeah.
It is the silent, bleeding wound of user churn.
Churn, yes.
Every single time a user quietly cancels a subscription or deletes an app, it is a micro failure of empathy. So today, I want you, the listener, to actively evaluate your own project.
Your own organization.
Your own leadership style as we pull these concepts apart. Are you building hostile architecture? Or are you engineering systems capable of generating unconditional loyalty?
To answer that, we have to look at how a company naturally evolves, or frankly devolves, after that initial launch.
When the chaos begins.
Right. When the users arrive, a structural wall is almost immediately erected between the creator and the consumer. The company hires quality assurance teams, build customer support departments.
We hire human shields.
Precisely. We place human shields between the people writing the code and the people using the code.
No.
And the psychological danger of this separation, it just cannot be overstated.
Because by placing a buffer there, the engineers become entirely divorced from the consequences of their actions.
Exactly. They no longer feel the pain of a confusing interface. They don't hear the panic of a user whose critical data was just lost.
They don't feel the sway of the building.
No. They exist in a sterilized environment. They react only to sanitized bug reports and filtered abstract metrics.
Like a spreadsheet that says conversion dropped 2%.
Right. Rather than the raw human friction their decisions actually create in the real world. This purposeful shielding of the builders is the #1 cause of early-stage churn.
Because when the feedback loop is severed, the product rapidly, almost inevitably, evolves away from human necessity. It becomes an exercise in engineering vanity.
But acknowledging that churn is a failure of empathy is just, well, it's just philosophy. We have to dig into the mechanics.
The actual physics of it.
Yes. To understand why a user leaves, we first have to fundamentally rethink how humans interact with technology. We have to look at the psychology of anthropomorphism at scale.
Anthropomorphism, assigning human traits to non-human things.
Right. Human beings are, at our core, relationship manufacturing creatures. We don't interact with software as if it were an inert, dead tool, like a hammer.
We assign personalities to everything.
Evolution has literally wired us to seek out relationship cues in our environment. I mean, we name our cars.
We yell at our laptops when they freeze.
Exactly, as if the machine is purposefully defying us. We assign human characteristics, human intentions, and human flaws to our digital applications.
And because we do this, we expect our software to behave with a certain decorum, a certain level of respect.
Which means acquiring a new user is not a mathematical transaction. It is psychologically identical to dating.
It's exactly like dating.
When you meet someone new, you are hypersensitive to every single signal they send. Are they polite? Are they listening?
Do they respect my time?
Right. In software, this creates what we call the origin story. It is the word-of-mouth narrative that users tell their peers about how they discovered your product, and more importantly, how it made them feel.
First impressions in software carry a ruthless, unforgiving pass-fail threshold.
Let's dwell on that threshold for a moment, because Hale has a brilliant, visceral analogy for this. The first date.
Okay, set the scene.
Imagine you are on a first date. The ambiance is nice, the dinner is going well, the conversation is flowing smoothly, and then you look across the table and you catch your date picking their nose.
The result is immediate termination of the relationship.
Immediate. There will be no second date. The threshold for forgiveness at that stage of the relationship is absolute zero.
Right.
You have no investment in this person, so any severe friction or lack of decorum results in total abandonment.
But let's shift the timeline. Let's say you catch your spouse of 20 years picking their nose while sitting on the couch on a Sunday afternoon.
You might roll your eyes.
You might sigh, but you shrug. It doesn't end the marriage.
No. The threshold of forgiveness has expanded exponentially through years of built-up equity, shared history, and established trust.
And here is where the technology industry fundamentally fails. Software companies routinely design their onboarding experiences as if they are already 20 years into a marriage with the user.
They demand patience.
They demand forgiveness for clunky interfaces, confusing menus, and slow loading times. They just assume the user will stick around to figure it out.
But the user's on a first date. If you present them with friction, if you pick your nose before the appetizers arrive, they terminate the relationship.
They close the tab.
They delete the app.
So the mandate becomes, how do we engineer a flawless first date? How do we build equity in those crucial first seconds?
Hale points us toward what he calls moments of seduction.
Moments of seduction.
Yes. These are the overlooked data points in a user's initial journey. The very first login screen. The very first automated welcome email. The first time they are forced to submit a support ticket.
Most companies treat these touchpoints as, well, dry functional utilities.
They're an afterthought, handed off to a junior developer to build.
But elite companies treat them as high-stakes emotional touchpoints. Consider the video hosting platform, Vimeo.
Right, Vimeo.
In its early days, its login page wasn't just a sterile corporate gateway. It was explicitly designed to evoke an emotional response, a feeling of entering a creative, vibrant community.
They also had that famous Easter egg.
Yes. If you typed the word fart into the Vimeo search bar, the screen would react playfully.
It sounds juvenile on the surface.
It does. But let's unpack the psychology of that. Why does a silly Easter egg matter to a professional user?
Because it is proof of life. Psychologically, it proves to the user that the software has a pulse. It proves there are actual human beings behind the cold logic of the code.
Human beings with a sense of humor.
Exactly. Who anticipate user behavior. It instantly warms the environment. And MailChimp executed this exact same psychology, but applied it to an even drier area. Help documents.
Historically, there is nothing more soul-crushing than software documentation.
It is the DMV of the digital world.
Yes. You only go to the help documents when you are already confused, frustrated, and angry.
MailChimp recognized this. So they completely redesigned these dry manuals. They formatted them to look like engaging, beautifully illustrated magazine covers.
They used typography, color, witty copywriting. They transformed a manual into an editorial experience.
And what was the operational result of that aesthetic change?
Readership of the documentation spiked massively, and simultaneously, the volume of their customer support tickets plummeted.
They seduced the user into reading the manual.
Right. By making the experience visually enchanting, they lowered the user's blood pressure, enabling them to actually absorb the information and solve their own problem.
But what if you don't have a visual product? What if you can't use beautiful magazine illustrations? Stripe is the perfect example here.
Stripe, an API company, they process payments.
For the non-developers listening, an API and application programming interface is essentially a digital waiter. It takes an order from the user's application, runs into the kitchen of the database, gets the requested data, and brings it back.
It is a highly technical, completely invisible process. Stripe has essentially zero traditional user experience.
Their entire UX is their documentation. But Stripe created an enchanting, seductive experience simply through flawless, meticulously written guides. And they did something revolutionary at the time.
What was that?
They auto-populated the user's unique API credentials directly into the code examples on the web page.
Oh, that is a brilliant mechanism. Explain why that matters so much to a developer.
Well, think about it. Before that, a developer would have to read the guide, open a separate tab, dig through their account settings, find their long cryptographic API key, copy it, go back to the guide, and paste it into the sample code just to see if it worked.
It was pure friction.
Stripe removed that entirely. By auto-populating the keys, they respected the developer's time, they removed the cognitive load. That lack of friction became their origin story.
Developers fell in love with a payment processor simply because it didn't waste their time.
Which brings us to Wufoo itself, and perhaps the most manipulative in a good way example of seduction.
They had a webhooks API. Again, a highly technical feature used to connect databases.
Right.
But instead of presenting it as a standard developer tool, they framed the entire interface around a medieval theme. They didn't call it an integration tool.
They called it weaponry.
Weaponry. The psychological manipulation there is profound. It tacks directly into the ego of the software developer.
By framing a dry integration task as the forging of a medieval weapon, they transformed a chore into a quest for prestige.
And the result? Users eagerly build over 25 different complex integrations. iPhone apps, WordPress plugins, Android tools.
Entirely for free.
They spent dozens of hours of their own time writing code for Wufoo, just for the prestige of saying they had programmed a weapon.
Exactly. Wufoo fundamentally altered the origin story of how a developer interacted with an API. They didn't just provide a tool, they provided an identity.
All of these examples, the search Easter eggs, the magazine covers, the auto-populated keys, the medieval weaponry, they all point toward the underlying physics of these relationships.
What Hale calls the thermodynamics of churn.
Let's get into that.
If we apply the second law of thermodynamics to business, the reality becomes stark. The law states that in a closed system, energy naturally dissipates.
Entropy takes over. Things decay.
If you view your customer base as a closed system, and you do not continuously apply new energy to that system, those relationships will inevitably decay.
You can't simply acquire a user, lock them in a subscription, and expect them to remain loyal without continuous, aggressive effort.
And yet, look at where companies spend their money. The mathematics of survival here are astonishing. Hale points out that a 1% decrease in user churn has the exact same mathematical impact on your overall revenue growth as a 1% increase in customer conversion.
Let that sink in for a second. They are mathematically equivalent.
But decreasing churn is vastly cheaper and vastly easier to achieve than fighting in the open market for new acquisitions.
So why? Why does the entire tech industry, why do massive corporations obsess over the top of the funnel? Why do they pour millions into conversion marketing while completely ignoring the silent, fatal bleeding of churn at the bottom?
Because conversion is glamorous. Marketing and sales are loud, highly visible metrics. You can ring a bell on the sales floor when you acquire a new user.
But churn is quiet.
Churn is a failure of empathy. Fixing churn requires looking inward. It requires acknowledging that your building sways in the wind. Fixing it requires operationalizing empathy, which is difficult, unglamorous, systemic work.
Which brings us to the core of this deep dive. How do you actually do that?
How do you operationalize it?
Right. How do you force a multi-million-dollar engineering team to actually operationalize empathy on a Tuesday morning? How do you permanently repair that broken feedback loop?
Kevin Hale's answer is a framework called Support-Driven Development,
SED?
SDD. The fix is radical. You abolish complex bureaucratic management structures. You tear down the wall between the builder and the user entirely. The mandate of support-driven development is uncompromising. Everyone in the company, regardless of their title, their salary, or their seniority, must do customer support.
Okay, let me pause and push back on this, because I know exactly what every executive listening is thinking right now. From a purely economic standpoint, this sounds insane.
It does.
Does it make any financial sense whatsoever to take a senior software architect who you are paying $150,000 or $200,000 a year and force them to sit at a desk answering basic customer service emails?
You are paying an engineering salary for call center labor.
Exactly. On paper, in a spreadsheet, it looks like a catastrophic misallocation of resources.
But in practice, it is brutal, absolute efficiency.
Explain how.
To understand why, we look at Paul English's strategy at the travel company Kayak. He installed a bright red customer support phone right in the middle of the engineering floor. It rang loudly.
Not in a separate call center, right next to the developers writing the code.
Right next to them. When an engineer is forced to answer that phone, and they receive the exact same infuriating repetitive bug report from 3 different confused users in a single morning, their psychology shifts.
Because if a dedicated support agent gets that call, they log a ticket, send it to a queue, and it sits there for months.
But an engineer
inherently hates inefficiency.
Exactly. You are weaponizing the engineer's low tolerance for annoyance. After the 3rd call, that engineer does not log a ticket.
No.
They stop whatever shiny new feature they're working on. They dive into the code base, and they permanently fix the bug. They eradicate the friction because they never want to answer that specific phone call ever again.
It is the ultimate aggressive form of quality assurance.
Yes.
You are no longer filtering the user's pain through a spreadsheet. You're injecting that pain directly into the creator's ear.
Once the engineer feels the friction, the illusion of their perfection is shattered. They are forced to align their code with human reality.
But support-driven development requires more than just forcing engineers to answer phones. It requires a systemic understanding of the emotional state of the user.
This is where we must examine the insights of software usability pioneer Kathy Sierra and the concept of emotional telemetry.
Sierra pointed out a fundamental structural flaw in all online communication. It strips away all nonverbal cues.
If you are a support agent reading an angry email, you are blind. You cannot read the user's facial expression. You can't hear the panic in their voice or the exhaustion.
The empathy is severed by the medium itself. It's just black text on a white screen.
Recognizing this loss of bandwidth, Wufu ran a brilliant operational experiment. They decided to artificially capture that missing telemetry.
How?
They added a simple, mandatory drop-down menu to their customer support contact forms. It was labeled Emotional State.
Before a user could type a single word about their technical problem, they had to select how they were feeling from a list of emotions.
And the data from this is staggering. That drop-down menu is utilized 78.1% of the time.
Let's unpack why that number is so high. Users actively wanted the company to know their emotional state before they even explained the glitch.
They needed to contextualize their technical problem with their human reality.
But the true genius is what happened to the text inside the actual support ticket.
Right. The psychological impact of that tiny feature was transformative. By giving the user an explicit, formal outlet for their frustration, a sanctioned way to say, I am angry or I am confused, the abusive behavior in the actual text of the tickets plummeted.
The all-caps shouting, the cursing, the aggressive exclamation marks.
It all vanished.
Why? What is the mechanism there?
Catharsis and validation. Because the users felt emotionally heard before they even hit submit.
Wow.
Once their anger was validated by the drop-down menu, the emotional burden was lifted. They didn't need to scream in the text box anymore.
They immediately became highly rational, precise, and objective in describing the actual bug.
They transformed from angry adversaries into helpful QA testers.
It is a profound lesson in human nature. People don't just want their software fixed. They want their frustration acknowledged.
They want to know that you know they are in pain.
If you do not give them a designated space for their anger, they will bleed that anger all over your product, and they will bleed it all over your support staff.
This ties directly into the research of user interface expert Jared Spool and a critical concept known as the knowledge gap.
The knowledge gap. This is the distance between a user's current understanding of how your system works and the target knowledge they actually need to successfully operate it.
And here's the trap. This is the pitfall that almost every technology company and frankly every organization falls into. They believe that adding new features automatically adds value.
They think more is better.
But Spool's research proves the exact opposite. Every time you add a new feature, you actually increase the knowledge gap. You make the software heavier. You make it harder to learn.
You push the target knowledge further away from the user's current state.
So how did Wufoo combat this? How do you grow a product without crushing the user under the weight of new features?
They implemented a strict operational rule. They dedicated a full 30% of all engineering time solely to decreasing the knowledge gap.
30%.
Nearly a third of their development resources.
Yes. That 30% was not spent on building new marketable features. It was spent entirely on building internal tools, refining context-aware help links, rewriting error messages to be clearer, and redesigning the interface to be more intuitive.
They spent a massive portion of their wealth just making sure the user didn't feel stupid.
And the ROI on that is measurable. In one instance, Hale notes that simply redesigning their documentation, just changing how they explain the existing product, slashed their overall customer support volume by 30% overnight.
They didn't change a single line of the actual product code.
No. They just changed the pedagogy, they closed the gap.
But maintaining that gap requires constant, unrelenting vigilance.
Spool quantified this necessity with his 6-week, 2-hour rule. This is a vital metric for any builder.
Explain the rule.
His research proved that the quality of any software degrades inevitably. It essentially rots, unless the builders, the engineers, the designers, and the founders have a minimum of 2 hours of direct, real-time exposure to actual users every single 6 weeks.
If you go longer than 6 weeks without physically watching a human being struggle with your creation, you lose the plot. Your empathy decays.
The building sways, and you don't feel it.
It all comes back to forced exposure, which brings us to the challenge of trajectory. How do you maintain this obsessive empathy when you grow?
When you scale from a scrappy team of 3 founders into a massive bureaucratic organization.
Yes. To answer this, we have to look at the Japanese quality matrix.
This matrix divides product quality into 2 distinct hierarchical categories. First, there's Atarame Henshitsu, which translates to functional quality.
And second, there is Miriokuteki Henshitsu, which translates to enchanting quality.
Let's analyze the hierarchy here carefully. If you are manufacturing a pen, it must first write flawlessly. The ink cannot skip. The barrel cannot leak in your pocket.
It must perform its fundamental task perfectly. That is functional quality.
Only after that baseline is immovably established can you design the pen to, say, look like a samurai sword or glow in the dark.
Function must absolutely precede wit.
Many companies, especially in the tech sector, reverse this entirely. They try to build enchanting, witty, clever features to mask a fundamentally broken core product.
They think a funny loading screen or a clever error message will excuse the system crash.
It won't. The Japanese quality matrix demands that the foundation be immovable before you attempt to delight the user.
Delight cannot compensate for dysfunction. A witty error message when a user loses an hour of work is not charming, it is insulting.
But assuming you have achieved that functional quality, assuming the pen writes perfectly, how do you continuously communicate your value to the user over time?
Because as we established with the thermodynamics of churn, relationships decay. The industry standard solution for this is the monthly email newsletter or the company blog.
But we know operationally that those are largely ignored by core users. Newsletters are marketing spam.
Right. When a user pays a monthly subscription and the software fundamentally looks and feels the same month after month, the user begins to feel that their investment is static.
They feel they are paying for the past, not the future. They feel taken for granted.
To solve this psychological decay, Wufoo engineered a protocol they called the Since You've Been Gone system. And it is a brilliant piece of behavioral engineering.
It really is. They built an internal mechanism that automatically time-stamped every single new release, every minor bug fix, every tiny upgrade the engineering team pushed live.
And here is the mechanism of action. When a specific user logged in, the system cross-referenced all of those global timestamps with that individual user's last specific login date.
Right. It then presented the user with a highly customized, personalized list of new features and fixes that had been added specifically while they were away.
It wasn't a generic newsletter shouting, "Look what we did this month." It was a targeted receipt of labor.
Exactly. A targeted receipt of labor. It communicated a very specific psychological message. While you were sleeping, we were working for you. Your money is constantly yielding new results.
It engineered a profound feeling of compounding value. It taps into the psychological principle of reciprocity.
When you show a user exactly how hard you are working for them in the background, you effectively halt churn by making the user feel almost indebted to the company's continuous effort.
You shift them from feeling like a consumer to feeling like a partner.
Which brings us to perhaps the most radical, culturally transformative practice of all: institutionalized humility, what they call the Friday ritual.
Every single Friday, the entire company at Wufoo executives, engineers, support staff stopped what they were doing.
They sat down and they wrote simple handwritten thank you notes on index cards to their users.
They physically wrote them, they stamped them with a little dinosaur ink stamp, included a sticker, and mailed them.
The origin of this practice is incredibly human. It came from the co-founder, Chris's mother. When he was a child, his mother forced him to write handwritten thank you notes to his relatives after Christmas. Why? To ensure their continued financial investment in him the following year.
It is a pragmatic, motherly wisdom. They simply applied this wisdom to a multi-million-dollar software ecosystem.
But the evolution of this ritual is where the real operational lesson lies. Because initially, they did what every company tries to do. They tried to optimize it.
They tried to be efficient. They targeted only their highest-paying enterprise-level users with these handwritten cards.
And that efficiency almost backfired spectacularly. The danger of broken expectations surfaced.
What happened?
A loyal, high-paying user who had received a beautiful handwritten card the previous year reached out in January. And they essentially asked, "Hey, I loved the card last year. Where's my second-year card?"
They realized that by providing a moment of enchantment, they hadn't just delighted the user, they had set a new baseline expectation.
When they failed to meet that new expectation the second year because they were too busy, they didn't just miss an opportunity to delight. They caused active, palpable disappointment.
The pivot here was essential for their survival. They shifted the practice entirely. Instead of targeting only the elite users once a year, attempting to bribe them for retention, they made humility a permanent, democratized, weekly culture.
They wrote cards every week to a random selection of users across all payment tiers, from the free users to the enterprise clients.
Obviously, at scale, they couldn't reach everyone.
No, mathematically impossible. But reaching everyone was no longer the point. The cultural act of writing the cards kept the company grounded.
It ensured that every single Friday, the engineers physically remembered that there were flesh and blood human beings paying their salaries.
It was a mechanism to force humility into the schedule.
And they took this democratization of power even further with an internal tactic they called king for a day.
This is a fascinating exercise in workplace agency. Periodically, leadership would randomly draw the name of a single employee from a hat.
Okay.
For the next 48 hours, over a weekend hackathon, that randomly selected employee dictated the entire product direction of the company.
Let's unpack the psychology of that for a frontline worker. Think about the specific friction a customer support agent feels. They have been dealing with the exact same irritating user interface glitch for 6 months.
They have begged engineering to fix it, but it's never a priority.
And suddenly, they are king for a day.
They have the absolute power to force the engineering team to fix the exact friction point that plagues their daily existence.
The impact on morale is massive. It proves to the team structurally that they have ultimate agency.
It demolishes the traditional top-down hierarchy of ideas. It says that the person closest to the user's pain has the authority to cure it.
To synthesize all of these disparate threads, the Japanese matrix, the handwritten cards, the kayak red phone, the emotional telemetry into a single unified thesis. Great technology is not actually about code efficiency.
The code is merely the medium.
The wires and the servers are just plumbing. Great technology and great business at scale is about the rigorous, systemic operationalizing of empathy.
It is the realization that the product is simply a conduit for a human relationship. You are building a relationship machine.
And whether you use a red phone on an engineering floor, an emotional drop-down menu, or a dinosaur stamp on an index card, the objective is exactly the same: to continuously, aggressively inject energy into a closed system to prevent the inevitable decay of trust.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a lingering, intense question to mull over.
Yes, if our digital environments are literally training us on how to interact with the world, what happens to human behavior when a company designs a system for unconditional love rather than just the ruthless extraction of attention?
What if we built systems that sought to understand human frustration before demanding a financial transaction?
And we must ask how these principles apply far beyond software, because the broken feedback loop exists everywhere.
It exists in massive government bureaucracies, in corporate management structures, and in our interpersonal relationships. The human shields are everywhere.
Exactly. If you took support-driven development and applied it to your own life, your own projects, your own leadership style, whose complaints have you been actively shielding yourself from?
What walls have you built to maintain your own comfortable illusion of perfection?
And what would happen tomorrow morning if you finally bypassed the human shields and picked up the red phone?